Hello and welcome to our book celebration conference for Dr. Jon Mills' um, new upcoming book, End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate. Today we gather for a few hours, for 3 hours to be exact, to hear some colleagues talking about the book, Dr. Mills responding, maybe reading something from the book, and discussing various topics that his book touches upon. So, what this book is about? This book is a call to be aware and to wake up. This is what actually how Jon described his book Aim in one of his latest interviews about the book. In the book description, the publisher wrote, End of the World is a warning about the dangerous precipice we find ourselves carrying towards, and a call for action to take control of our own future. Why do we need to do that? Because there were other lost civilizations. Here are just six ones that I found in Encyclopedia Britannica that there were much more civilizations that were lost. Will we be the next civilization that is lost? So civilization is all about us humans. Who are we? We are the killing species. We are the sexual species. We are the thinking species. We are the evolving species. We have complicated mental and just being a human health, mental and psychological health as a spectrum, appreciating the unconscious, using various protective unconscious defense mechanisms. Our capacities are for love, concern, learning, curiosity, imagination, creating many reality in health and pathology, integrating AI and virtual reality. We have complicated emotional, individual, and group health. We are able to be traumatized psychologically, even transgenerationally, and able to go to post-traumatic growth mode. We are able to use various connecting with others pathways like empathy, sympathy, collaboration, group fantasies or PH fantasies, group think. As E.O. Wilson said in his The Social Conquest of Earth, we have created a Star Wars civilization with Stone Age emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Humans are involved in processing discontent, as in Freud's civilization and its discontents. It's about the clash between the desire for individuality and expectations of the society. Clash of the pleasure principle about freedom, sexual satisfaction, murderous wishes, and the reality principle and the need to conform and repress the instincts. This book has a lot of endorsers. One of the endorsers is Dr. Vamik Volkan, who many people know, and he wrote that this book is a careful examination of the possible future of mankind. With examples from many parts of the world, the reader learns about risk factors such as global warming, industrial pollution, overpopulation, food and water scarcity, infectious diseases, and our not having oversight of the ability to control or regulate technological sources. The role of individual and large group psychology, collective traumas, transgenerational transmissions, and the prejudicial unconscious factors leading to wealth and social divisions, racism, wars, and warlike situations are also explored soberly in thinking about what may occur. The author refers to collective moral actions for a better future and mentions that what we can do for the planet as individuals is fairly insignificant. However, what he has done as a single person by writing this timely book is very significant. There are many other endorsers, of course, too. And one of other endorsers, Robert Fowler, said that he reminded us about Bertolt Brecht, who said political change is only possible for those who fear bad life more than death. So here are like various topics that Jon's book is addressing. Here on Earth, 10 billion, about overpopulation, the evil that men do, about the wars and killing and ethics of killing, the doomsday clock ticking, about dropping the bomb, and will it be the final century? Apocalypse now, global catastrophic risks, defining the risks, nihilism, and so on. So Jon dedicated this book to his daughters, Mackenzie, Chloe, and Ivy, with the hope that their children will inherit a better world. We will hope so. Children are super important because if childhood is very, very tricky business of surviving it. Because if one thing goes wrong or anything goes wrong, and usually something goes wrong, then you're compromised as a human being. You're going to trip over that for a good part of your life. In the meantime, our children are witnessing wars. Our children go to bed hungry on the time of plenty. Our children live in poverty. Our children experience abuse. Our children and in general humans experience human trafficking. So um, all these atrocities committed towards humanity and towards children are done by us humans. So what do we do about it? As Albert Einstein said, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Why wouldn't we do something? Why wouldn't we do a lot? We are sometimes paralyzed by fear that becomes like a fear contagion that spreads worse than any virus. We are reminded that, by Seneca, that you have all the fears of mortals and all the desires of immortals. So we fear death, and we fear that immortality is not something that we will attain. Fear spreads really like a contagion. There were studies, fairly recent studies, that shows how people do feel more fear when experiencing it in group of friends, and especially if the threat experiences are stacked one after another. For example, as people were going from one haunted room to another in this experiment, and when the subject of the study observed their friends experiencing fear too, they were more fearful than ever. Again, what do we do about it? We have, this book is a call for action. As Malcolm X said, the future belongs to those who prepare it today. And as Carl Jung said, where your fear is, there is your task. Everything is in our hands. So right now, we start our program, and we'll start with Dr. Loray Daws, who will be introducing Jon Mills, his colleague, Canadian fellow colleague, psychologist and psychoanalyst. And here we are. So Loray Daws is a registered clinical psychologist with Health Professions Council of South Africa and registered psychologist in the College Psychologist of British Columbia, Canada. graduated from University of Pretoria, and served as a full-time lecturer from 1998 to 2006. He participated in 2003 in founding the Rorschach Institute of South Africa and served as a board member from 2004 to 2007. He's also an assistant editor of the South African Rorschach Journal and remained co-director of the South African Masterson Institute for the study of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. He completed the 3-year postgraduate certificate in psychoanalytic psychotherapy for the disorders of self, personality disorders, and serves as a senior faculty member at the International Masterson Institute for Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy in New York, since as well as a board member and teaching faculty at ORI. I can list many other things. He's also editor of many journals, also edited quite a few books already. But right now, I think I will give the podium to Loray so he can talk about what we gather here today. Thank you, Loray. Unmute yourself.
Oh, Ina, thank you. Colleagues, Dr. Mills, good morning and afternoon and evening. My title for today was Reading Jon Mills on Necrophilic Culture and Modern Designer's-ide, Individual and Systemic Concerns. It is both and introduced today the current volume of Mills entitled End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate. For those who do not know Dr. Mills, he is a Canadian philosopher, psychoanalyst, and retired clinical psychologist. His principal theoretical contribution, as evident in more than 30 volumes and hundreds of scientific publications, have been in the philosophy of the unconscious, a critique of psychoanalysis, philosophical psychology, value inquiry, and the philosophy of culture. His clinical contributions are in the area of attachment pathology, trauma, psychosis, and psychic structure. Dr. Mills is also an honorary professor and an international member of the Comparative Psychoanalysis Research Group, Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies, Universities of Essex in the UK, on faculty in the postgraduate programs in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, the Gordon Dorner School of Psychology, and Delphi University in the US, faculty and supervising analyst at the New School for Existential Psychoanalysis, and emeritus professor of psychology and psychoanalysis at the Idly Graduate Professional School in Toronto, Canada. As writer, Dr. Mills has been referred to as an independent and serious thinker, a focused and iconoclastic scholar, and one of the most scholarly psychoanalytic thinkers of our time. It is thus no surprise that he has received a significant contribution to Canadian Psychology Award in 2008, won a Goethe Award in 2013 for Best Book, and was the 2015 recipient of the Otto Weininger Memorial Award for Lifetime Achievement from the section of Psychoanalysis and Psychodynamic Psychology of the Canadian Psychological Association. In 2006, 11, 13, 18, and 22, Dr. Mills also won a Gradiva Award for his scholarship given by NARC in New York, which has been the most times in more categories than any other recipient in the history of the prize, including Best Article twice, book, edited book, and the TV series The Talking Cure. Although retired from clinical practice, Dr. Mills remained an internationally recognized scholar, teacher, and cultural critic who maintains an active writing schedule and still lectures worldwide, writing on books such as psychoanalysis, philosophy, cultural criticism, existentialism, value inquiry, the origins of consciousness and the philosophy of the unconscious, psychosis, evil, the end of the world, God, religion, and circular humanism. As if that's all. With all this in mind, I now turn to the current work, Desolation of Being. Reading the current volume of Dr. Mills, I was made acutely aware of the work of various known historical and contemporary psychiatrists and psychoanalysts concerning, in Dr. Mills' own description, the desolation of being. Here I include Erich Fromm's thinking on necrophilia and biophilia in the anatomy of human destructiveness, Carl Jung's volume 10 of his collected works, especially the chapters The Spiritual Problem of Modern Man, After the Catastrophe, The Undiscovered Self, and the Rise of the New World, Harry Stack Sullivan's transformative article, Tensions Interpersonal and International, A Psychiatrist's View, Intentions That Causes War, published by UNESCO in 1950, the Dutch psychologist and cultural critic Matthias Desmet in his Psychology of Totalitarianism, Mary Cole Nelson and Michael Evil, Self and Culture, Christopher Boller's Meaning and Melancholia, Life in an Age of Bewilderment, and last and not least, Eigen's Age of Psychopathy. Mills writes, throughout this book, I explore the main key existential risks and global catastrophic threats to human existence that currently command our world's attention. The conclusion is not pretty. We are in dire straits. We are witnessing our planet slowly disintegrate as devastating economies, social implosion, and anarchy during the pandemic have brought us to our knees. Why are we passive global bystanders to our ecological crisis? Why do we allow obscene disparities in wealth and social division to proliferate? Remain silent about the prevalence of psychopathy in politics and global capitalism, and bow to the imbalances of power that could ultimately bring us to our own extinction. It is only on the condition that we are under the unconscious spell of a compulsion to destroy ourselves. Furthermore, the world remains unconscious of our global predicament. Inertia and idleness in the service of dissociation and disavowal become an unconscious strategy to protect us from the very thing we are bringing about. Humanity is guilty of such inaction, for turning a blind eye, hence unwilling to see, and for sticking its head in the sand. We need to awaken a new ethic of responsibility to the planet. I will talk about viventonomy soon, where empathy, solidarity, and becoming better global citizens in the service of the common good will lead to a better polis. For this reason, the time has come to critically examine those elements of the human psyche that defeat efforts to mitigate our looming catastrophe. This is central. While continue to sleepwalk through our anesthetized states of moral torpor, denial, and self-delusion impair our capacity to collectively rise to the occasion. The question becomes, will our collective unconscious death wish bring about our own demise? Through various chapters, as evident on the website, thank you, Ina, Dr. Mill focuses on our failed stewardship concerning Mother Earth and her precious resources, the ontology of prejudice and evil, the proliferation of our collective unconscious politics of othering, our collective failure of empathy, our transgenerational transmission of trauma, and the possibility of renewal. In Bionian language, Mill's headers, to me, serve as cultural beta elements, our contemporary cultural impacts in search of alpha functioning. Although much will be said throughout the current session about these areas in Dr. Mill's own unique and scholarly tongue, I think that the work furthers various important philosophical and psychoanalytic vertices for me. This includes Heidegger's work on discourse and thinking, Giorgio Agamben's bare life conceptualization, Todd de Bose's emphasis on the power of designizide, the killing of being, epistemophilic violence, as seen in Christopher Boller's Fascist States of Mind, Wilfred Beyond's concept of moral violence, D.W. Winnicott's moral sin, or the unthinkable catastrophe to seep into the core of another and steal him of himself, Thomas Ogden's act of theft, and his psychoanalysis of the unlived life, and Michael Eigen's notion of psychic deadness and hallucinated truths in the age of psychopathy. A detailed description falls outside the scope of this introduction, although I will attempt to outline for further discussion and dreaming. Dr. Mills' chapter, The Evil That Men Do, chapter 2, reminds me of Erich Fromm's timeless description of the necrophilic attitude, as well as the great Simone Weil's book entitled The Iliad, or the Poem of Force, quoted by Sheldon Bach in Narcissistic States and the Therapeutic Process, accentuating designer-side forces we as a culture need to address. Here, if we define a force either in Eigenwelt, Mitwelt, Umwelt, or Überwelt, meaning self, others, things, and the above world, it is that X that turns anybody who is subjected to it into a thing. Exercised to the limit, it turns man into a thing in the most literal sense. It makes a corpse out of him. Here we see a force in its grossest and most summatory form, the force that kills. How much more varied in its processes, how much more surprising in its effect is the other force, the force that does not kill, or it does not kill just yet. From its first property, the ability to turn a human being and the world into a thing by the simple method of killing him, flows another, quite prodigious too in its own way, the ability to turn a human being into a thing while he is still alive. He is alive, he has a soul, and yet he is a thing. An extraordinary entity is this, a thing that has a soul. And as for the soul, what an extraordinary house it finds itself in. Who can say what it cost it, moment by moment, to accommodate itself to this residence? How much writhing and bending, folding and pleating is required of such a soul? Introduced in 1955, the German existential philosopher Martin Heidegger focused on two kinds of thinking, calculative and meditative. According to Heidegger, in the former, that is calculative logic, we are currently over-reliant, if not entrenched, and is beautifully discussed in Mills chapter 6 under techno-nihilism. And from the latter, the meditative, we are in active flight. These two broadly determinist ways of viewing autochthony and alterity could function instructively only if a dialogical tension can be maintained between them, as each provides a frame of reference from engaging others and the physical world. Heidegger cautions that if we overfocus on the calculative, very evident in Mills' book, we become a defenseless and perplexed victim at the mercy of irresistible superior power of technology. Furthermore, calculative thinking mainly computes, forever promising the new, betterment of greater possibilities, thus moving from new prospect to the next. In essence, calculative thinking never fully stops, allowing itself to collect itself in any transcendental or meditative way. See here chapters 4 and 5 of Mills. This is not difficult to see in the areas of pure science, technology, engineering, and mathematical solutions to our dilemmas in living, focusing exclusively on a utility and our functional worth, that is, control mastery adaptations exclusively. At worst, Fromm's marketing character types supporting necroculture, man as zombie, totally stupefied. From this perspective, a thing as object or a person as object has no value unless there is some functionality related to it. I quote, "This relation to man and world as such is a principal technical one, already developed from the 17th century. This mode of thinking manifests itself in many different forms concerning our interaction with human and the non-human world." The non-human world is very important to Dr. Mills. Ethically, consequentialism, specifically its most classical form of act utilitarianism, decisions are made on a type of hedonistic calculus. One weighs, in R units of happiness, the relative benefits of action X against action Z. The best choice, if not the most ethical, is the measured greatest good for the most significant number. Seemingly democratic, its shadow realities are evidence. See here Mills, A World Without Recognition, Chapter 7. Heidegger also warns that attacking technology blindly is also of no use. We clearly depend and see the benefits of our advances. Nonetheless, Heidegger muses, quote, but suddenly and unaware, we find ourselves so firmly shackled to these technical devices that we fall into bondage with them. A debate further by Mills. Meditative and reflective thinking in contrast, and from which Heidegger argues we are in flight, is not focused on utility, but rather on meaning, that is, on honest attempts at embracing the meaning behind our decisions and actions, and for us to do so, we must be able to release ourselves from our over-reliance on the calculative, the technological, and the essentialist mindset we find ourselves in. Even our agents of freedoms, such as psychologists, are the product of non-contemplative, empirically based training, fusing itself with a medical model, finding itself saturated with deficit correction and disease models of mind. Releasement towards things and openness to the mystery of being belong together, granting us the possibility of dwelling in the world in a totally different way. The openness and meditative practice beyond F&O is essential to many French psychoanalysts, and Heidegger further states, releasement towards things and openness to mystery never happens by themselves. They do not befall us accidentally. Both flourish only through persistent and courageous thinking. If releasement towards things and openness to the mystery awaken within us, then we should arrive at a path that would lead to a new ground of freedom. In the ground that creativity which produce lasting works could strike new roots. Again, as soon to be discussed by Mills' continuation of an important form of courageous thinking, the notion of parrhesia à la Foucault. Eigen writes that Beyond continuously warns that a reductionistic misuse of the psyche and its effects, a form of intellectual hortus siccus, may serve as the basis for moral violence. Moral violence may contain violence to time and space, the overuse of causality and restrictive definitions. For scholars such as Eigen and Mills, the no-thing acts as a guardian against our propensity to concretize, literalize, and objectify the psyche, the other, and life in general. Thingifying, and see here Mills' Institutionalized Evil, page 68 onwards. The world needs to be slowed down by cultivating the attitude of the no-thing. For Bolas, the process of thingifying is found in the fascist state of mind, as opposed to the democratic state of mind, the product of limiting forms of contemporary thinking that include operationalization, refractive thinking, and the like. Liming both, quite provocatively, Bolas calls committive and omittive genocide. For Bolas, committive genocide is characterized by distortion, distorting the view of the other, rendering them unintelligible and less credible, such as slander, decontextualization, the rise of the political and biological selves. Here, I just want to stand still for a moment. Here, in decontextualization, life is taken out of context, political gaps leading to rhetorical violence, the extreme acts seen in Agamben's bare life. That is, the removal of a victim of his tribe, isolated for purposes of persecution. The most dangerous product of decontextualization is the reversal of such logic, in which essence precedes existence rather than the opposite. Dr. Mills refers to this, what we find in the work of essentialist claims. Think here of concepts such as zero empathy, zero tolerance, and the like. Synoptically stated, in decontextualization, the other's sovereignty is constricted, eroded, minimized, essentially based on man being either a biological and political entity only. Agamben even describes modern concentration camps as reflecting a condition inhumana, when the other is sequestered to an encampment. The arrangement allows the creation of an insidious panoptical clave, which allows the treatment of the other as having less or no humanity. The other is given no human consideration and is not allowed the exception or right to an explanation. Combine, according to Agamben, science and even the law based on vague and exceptional concepts, think your good morals. Exception laws become evident and serve as the impetus in putting into motion various arrangements to protect the state and its constituents against those deemed dangerous, different, and otherly may be put into protective custody in all shapes and forms, even under the umbrella of preventative measures. This reminds of Guantanamo Bay, where its inhabitants lived in a state of exception, wherein general and international human rights laws were suspended, if not violated. To a more nuanced and less dramatic version, although detrimental in the long run, all zero-tolerance approaches in human relations have unintended consequences. In education, one sees the sequestering of problem children, the negation of their interpersonal freedoms and complexities, and the misuse of such policies by pedagogues to track problematic children emotionally, cognitively, and society. As a teacher said to a parent and their child after their child played peekaboo at Halloween, and unfortunately frightening another child, to the parent, your child's lack of empathy will not be tolerated. This irony is self-evidentiary, if not tragic, especially from an adult deciding what is seen as empathic or what is not. Such apotropaic genetic approaches reflect our frightful perceived lack of controlling what we consider evil, our collective fear responsiveness inscribed in modern magical traditions, science, medicine, research, and politics that confuse correlation with complexity, that mindlessly supports binary thinking, lacking any ontological depth. Denigration, belittling another person's view, ridiculing them. Caricature, cartooning the opposition and cultivating an image that serves. Character assassination, discrediting the personal character and thus the view of another. Change of names in day-to-day praxis. What is Thingy's name? This person is a redneck. Categorizations, aggregation. A person becomes part of a category, a group. He is a Freudian. He is a narcissist. And then, for Bolos, last but not least, omissive genocide includes the absence of reference, leaving out, ignoring, or getting rid of a contribution of one group, person, or selected fact. To counter such moral violence, Eigen's thinking on the attitudes I don't know, a meditative antidote, might provide much relief. He says or writes, perhaps we need to practice feeling and saying, I don't know, like a musician practices scales as part of exercise in living. It is a grace to be able to finally say out loud, I don't know. A certain kind of unknowing supports speech. There is a taboo against not knowing in our culture. Within moral violence, experience cannot build. Thinking, feeling rhythms may become foreclosed. Concretizing attitudes may predominate, and causal thinking only attitudes prevail. For Eigen, causal thinking readily lends itself to the hardening of psychic arteries. As such, all the knowing game struggles to tolerate gaps, nuances, endless shifts, and the many corrections we need in day-to-day living. Thinking, feeling, and it being able to see, to smell, hear, feel, digest, and work on emotional reality may remain underutilized. Cultivating a thinking heart may soften defensive, causal-like cognition, in time transcending rigid attentional styles, a kind of loving cognition. A more fruitful relationship may be cultivated between so-called differentiated and undifferentiated modes of mental functioning, rational thought and image making, enlivening thought, feeling dead spots, and stagnation. It might even protect us against what Eigen calls the deadening triad: stupor, hallucinosis, and megalomania. All of them are attempts to undo meaning, ridding the self of the no thing, a reflection of being subject to thingification, in turn thingifying. That is, in stupor, one rids oneself of the no thing. Again, think here of numbness and Mills's work on techno. Cultivating versus cultivating states of creative emptiness, creative waiting for being. In hallucinosis, there is an evacuation of mental debris that could stand for thinking. And in megalomania, our modern pathology, it would seem, one does not find a transformative high, the high of a moment of revelation, revealment, or releasement, but of arrogance, of closing, of learning from experience, the use of self and other as things in themselves. A dead and deadening mind, so well described by Kurt Vonnegut in his book Welcome to the Monkey House, and see his essay on Harrison Bergeron. Maybe a solution. Mills, Eigen, and Beyond's ontology of O, the murderous superego, and the importance of psychoanalytic faith. According to Eigen's, Beyond, and Mills, the human race has focused exclusively on control mastering adaptations. Our psyches may not as yet develop the capacity to tolerate the emotional truth needed for psyche integration. Beyond noted that the human race is ill-equipped to tolerate its own experiential capacity. It naturally orientates itself towards external objects and the task of survival. Beyond, Eigen, Mills are not referring to moral positions per se, not in a still small voice found in superego-based adaptations, but rather a deeply held conviction that new ways of being a person in becoming, remains a frightening prospect. Experience, its impact, and implications cannot be fully assimilated or accommodated by a single psyche, even more so in the very working with the experience experienced, we may be both exposed or produce states our psyche and its equipment cannot sufficiently handle. I quote, "We are too much or too little for ourselves. We evacuate and in turn turn off our capacities, our exquisite sensitivities, and our inherent autochthonous ways of getting at and into experience needed for truthful experience." Beyond and Eigen and Mills state that if we accept our embryonic nature, our deficits, even make room for it, we may become aware of what can and cannot do, that is, not overburden, strain, or overload. We may try to do too much, overextend ourselves, substitute omnipotence for openness, ravage ourselves with mastery, rather than discovering what partnership can mean. I have more to say. I'm nearly out of time. I might just say enter viventonomy. Kevin Below, director of EPIS, writes on the antidote to our ontological unsettledness in his philosophy of viventonomy, the philosophy that's deeply concerned with life and living per se. Thus for Bordeaux, and stated similarly by Dr. Mills in the introduction of his book, quote, "We transform human-centered anthropologies into transhuman ontologies that move us from egocentric, desirous, possessive, unmindful beings into a complex constellation of elements that constitute a new kind of humanity, based on a new sort of autonomy that is grounded in viventonomy. The new self-constitutions include a self as responsible, the self that lives in solidarity, the self who promotes the rights of all that lives, and a self who lives in underlying ontological space. We could formulate these elements with more finesse, I'm sure, but leaving them in their rough state articulates them with crispness and accuracy. The second moment of this transformation comes from the replacement of egocentric values and action potentials with a whole set of values and action potentials that are virtuous with this new worldview. And in doing so, we may move beyond current catastrophes and be revivified in our potential to take up our creativity in a responsible way, not just for family, kinship, or state, but for the future stranger, yet unborn. We, with Mills, the guardians of ontological university. Thank you.
Thank
You,
you,
Dr.
Loray,
Mills.
so much. Thank you, Loray, so much for your introduction. And, that was great. You covered so much. And I am
A
sorry for
pleasure.
tiring you. Yeah, thank you. Okay,
There's
so
more.
yeah, I know. So we'll bring Dr. Mills in, and maybe you can respond to Loray and talk about anything you want to talk about. Unmute yourself and yes, you are unmuted. Okay.
Well, I'm quite overwhelmed here with emotion. I'm just honored to be here and that you would, have this event for me in my book. And Ina and Loray, I can't tell you how grateful I am. And also just how insightful your analysis was, Loray, of all the different elements of the book. And from a uniquely psychoanalytic perspective, I should say a little bit about the background of this is that it's basically based upon my 30 years of reflection on the topic, and it initially grew out of my doctoral studies in philosophy, where I was writing a dissertation on Hegel and Freud, and which I turned into a book later. But I was taken by I came into philosophy though from psychology and from psychoanalysis, so I'm coming in with a certain perspective that is psychologically oriented, and then being introduced to this massive field of ideas. And I ended up gravitating toward German idealism and contemporary continental thinking. So Heidegger, of course, was one of my areas of specialty. But the one thing that struck me about my Hegel studies was how he was attempting to take into account all of humanity, and everything from the logos, how the structure of mind, the structure of nature itself, and the evolving spirit or Geist, as the coming into being of self-consciousness. And of course, this ends with the culmination of what we call civilization or society. And Hegel's very optimistic. I mean, spirit reaches a stage of such enlightenment that we are, ethical and religious and contemplative beings that reach an absolute understanding of how we came into being. Whereas, of course, Freud is quite much more pessimistic about the nature of human aggression, and the destructive principle or the death drive, but also disparaging of much of society of his day. But he was worried, of course, with having gone through the First World War and seeing the rise of Nazi Germany in the Second. So the times, though, are a bit different, but not necessarily that different. they seem to me to be much more complex technologically, geopolitically, and so I started to take some attention to looking at events outside of the discipline, meaning not just staying within psychoanalytic or psychology proper. And having witnessed the Rwanda massacre, the warfare in Croatia, the former Yugoslavia, living through a doubling of the world population, where we have 8 billion people now. We're slated to have 10 within the next 20 or so years. And I, watching the climate crisis transpire right before my very eyes, including wildfires about an hour from my home. So when the pandemic hit, of course, a perfect apocalypse, and I decided to finish this project that's been on my mind for nearly 30 years. So that's the background. And I think I'll just, pause there and see what people have to say, or any thoughts you might have, or questions.
I usually ask people to put some the names in the chat, or if you like only to use the raised hands, you can do that. So if anybody wants to ask anything, just unmute yourself and jump in. And I'm monitoring the chat. I don't see anything. So, people are still digesting. And since they didn't read the book, okay, there is one question, 1 second. Okay, Brian D'Agostino has a comment. So Brian, please.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. I ordered the book. I haven't gotten it yet. I just want to say that from what you've said here, and also in your session at the IPHA conference last weekend, I'm still trying to get a handle on the big picture here in terms of what your thesis is. And let me pose the question like this. When I'm trained as a political scientist, so when I look at the world and I look at the multiple crises that you're talking about, I see a war system, I see a system of global corporate capitalism, I see all kinds of cultural things like racism and sexism. And so if we recognize that the global crisis is connected to these systems, and that there is a power structure, and that sometimes we talk about we as if somehow humanity as a whole is causing this, when in fact obviously there's the tremendous differences in power between the policymakers who are actually making the policy and the vast majority of the general public. To me, the question is, how do we create a mass movement that's capable of challenging the power structure and changing the course that we're on? Now, can you describe your thesis in relation to these kinds of institutional questions? What is your thesis? I'm kind of fuzzy about this.
Well, thank you, Brian. Yes, I don't know if I have a single thesis. One would be applying the notion of this bystander effect of watching our planet be destroyed in front of our very eyes, or watching people in power, like you say, systems of power be able to continue to exploit the masses. And to me, it's such a large problem that, you know, I don't even know if I profess to understand it, let alone know how to fix it. But the feeling here is that I'm in agreement about how you characterize humanity, that, you know, there is no such thing. I mean, there's not some one totalistic or holistic or absolute structure or process, but we are you know, we are influenced by certain universals that we all participate in of some form. And of course, in our language, we put a priority or primacy on the nature of the unconscious that's operative in our world affairs. So it seems to me that even in discussions with people about this topic, I'm either I get dismissed with rolling eyes because of the title, which of course is deliberately theatrical, but that people are quick to want to engage in a certain defense, let's say climate denialism. And so people are hung up in their resistances. And it almost seems like as long as we remain unconscious about these things and we don't have a honest discussion, that we're in trouble here if we don't start thinking about these things. So to me, there seems to also be a collective phenomenon. Maybe we can call it a collective unconscious death wish or a shadow, to use a Jungian term, some type of ecological complex. But the notion of how do we engage in all these various systems of power distribution and hegemonies is not easy, given that they're so entrenched, and given that we as citizens are just, you know, individuals within a, you know, massive collective of people. It is going to take, I think, some effort to have some collective identification of what we value, and the more people that value making changes to safeguard, whether it be the planet, whether it be to curtail our proclivity toward self-destruction, aggression, war, etc., where instead of disarming our nuclear, you know, stockpiles, people are modernizing and building them and creating even more panic and you know, and anxiety. And then how do we get rid of leaders who are psychopaths or who have such control, monopoly on the masses? It really is quite mind-boggling. And then when nations have their own self-interest and priorities over others, then we're hoping that only on some collective identification that we are ultimately intertwined and interdependent on each other in this globalized world, where we see that this is in our best interest, and not only how to self-preservation, but about everything. But I don't profess to you know, solve this conundrum. You know, I can't resolve it, but if I can at least introduce these you know, scary situations, that maybe people will start talking about it more, and that will lead to some dialogue at the very least. And hopefully, if we go back to the Hegelian notion that that reality and civilization is a process of becoming, that we're hoping that divisions and bifurcations will lead to some type of higher form of synthesis that will be the next level or sublation of society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have more, but we have only 5 minutes, so let me check the chat. Okay, so Michael Fishman. All right, so okay, Michael, maybe you can unmute yourself and ask your question yourself. We have 5 minutes before the next thing, and then whoever is next on in the queue, I will bring you in after, when we have a next time discussion with the audience. So Michael, you can unmute yourself, please. Can you unmute? Okay, you're not unmuted.
How about now?
Now it's okay.
Dr. Mills, thank you for your book. When I was notified of it, I got very excited because you're addressing a lot of the issues that I'm putting together and trying to publish. I'm specifically focused. I'm a trained psychoanalyst. I've been trained as an ego psychologist, also as a Jungian. I've been doing this over 25 years, and I've developed my own style. I work pretty much at the spiritual level, and I work pretty much with the spirit of Christ, even though I'm a Jewish guy. Go figure that. So I work with all the spirits, but primarily what I'm focused on, because I was also an archaeology minor my undergraduate days, I'm looking at the evolution of the species. And we think we're a lot more evolved than we are. We're not really very evolved. And what my paper is addressing, and hopefully it'll be a book, is called anger addiction. And what I'm saying here is this is in epidemic form in this country and internationally. I do some work with law enforcement, the military. I have a general practice of upper middle class patients. I have not had a patient that didn't have a problem with anger one way or another. Anger is the main problem. The way I work is I show people how to use the most vicious anger in the service of love. It can be done. The devil wants to go back. He wants to go back. If you leave him alone, he'll wreak havoc. But the point I'm trying to make is we all are susceptible to being triggered into fighting. And this is an international proportion. You were mentioning the different war periods and so forth. This is all because of our addiction to killing each other. We have not evolved that far from the Paleolithic period. We think we have, but we haven't. So what I discovered is the core of this addiction lies in sadomasochism. If we trace back the species, it's very natural for us to hit somebody in the head. They have examined fossils, male fossils, and they all have cracked skulls. It was very easy for us to crack each other's heads. We saw a woman, we grabbed her, she didn't have a choice. Bang, that's it. She tries to move, kill her. These impulses are still alive. They are abundant in the incarcerated groups because they grow up in a society that promotes that. I grew up in a nice middle-class environment with a mother who was a school teacher, a father who was also a teacher. But they would fight. They had arguments.
Michael, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but Is it any question, or you just wanted to make this comment?
Okay, so I just wanted to mention that I'm thrilled about your book. I can't wait to get it, Dr. Mills, and read it. I hope we can stay in contact with each other. And I can tell by the way you're listening that we're on the same page.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. So we have two more questions. Actually, Richard Alongi said that he just wanted information about the recording and the transcript, and he appreciates that we are getting together for creating this opportunity to talk about these topics for the health of our planet, civilization, and also celebrating your, John, contributions. Okay, so that's kind of his thank you. And I think we can still have Catherine Madden. I have to find you to, like, please unmute. I will find you and give you a highlight. So you can ask your question.
Hi, hi, John. Catherine Madden. I'm a licensed psychoanalyst in New York City. I've just got your book, and it is next to me, and I have a lot of reading to do. My question, I think, goes to what I'm finding is thematically the core that I'm so far in your talk finding to be extremely important. Quote, you said the primacy of the unconscious. And of course, you're preaching to the choir with all of us, because I think probably, I don't know for sure, but probably everyone in this gallery would acknowledge the primacy of the unconscious, and our patients and the people closest to us, etc. But I don't know if it was you or Loray who mentioned, you know, the billions more people that are going to be born and coming onto our planet. So the question is, considering the importance of the primacy of the unconscious, and I think we all know through our experience how difficult sometimes it is to even have our brightest clients or patients understand the various levels of the psyche. So how, and this is a big one that we'll be answering for the next 10 years, hopefully, but how do we, I imagine spreading out into groups, and I know I teach also Pacifica and Columbia. Those are my two nests. And a lot of the students from Pacifica are going out and going into hospices or nursing homes or starting their own groups and being very inventive about things I never would have imagined, very creative ways of teaching others about the primacy of the unconscious. Title of your next book. And
Okay.
how,
So,
okay,
sorry, maybe John can answer,
yeah,
or
that's it.
keep it to the next time when you will have the audience, or do you want to answer something now, or would you like to keep it for next time?
Well, thank you, Catherine, for your support and your interest in the topic. The question is, yeah, how do we educate social collectives on their own psyche, and all of our psyches, and especially when we are even divided as a profession about what constitutes the psyche. Hence all these different, analytic camps, different schools that have different, perspectives and vantage points. But clearly, this is something that is needed. How do we introduce proper education in the schools, not post-secondary education? It's even like right now, do we ever see a psychoanalyst on television talking about, let's say, human behavior? No, we see medical doctors, psychiatrists who will reduce everything down to a brain state. But so I'm very much in sympathy with what you're saying, and hoping that that would be an important societal thing, and to try to even have a discussion about what constitutes these primal motivations that drive our thoughts, actions, and behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we will have to move to the next person that wanted to be here but couldn't, and this is Danielle Knafo, who sent us the recording. So let me just say a few words about Danielle. Danielle Knafo, Dr. Danielle Knafo is a clinical psychologist, psychoanalyst, and prolific author, and a popular speaker. She was a professor at LIU Post and its clinical psychology doctoral program for 22 years, where she chaired and concentration on serious mental illness, SMI. Additionally, she is a faculty and supervisor at NYU postdoctoral program for psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and at Delphi postgraduate programs for psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. She writes and lectures on many subjects, including psychoanalysis, art, creativity, trauma, psychosis, sexuality and gender, and technology. She is an author of The Age of Perversion, Desire and Technology in Psychoanalysis and Culture, also articles like Guys and Dolls, Relational Life in the Technological Era, Technology, Perversion, Dehumanization, and Working with the Limits of Human Experience. She's a writing consultant and leads private writing groups, and she maintains private practice in Manhattan and Great Neck. So let me right now share the video that she prepared for us, and let's hear from her. 1 second.
Everyone. Hi, John. I'm sorry I can't attend the conference today, but I'm pleased to have been invited to help celebrate Jon Mills' new book, The End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate. A catchy title that definitely gives one pause, as it should. Jon is a brilliant and courageous intellectual who is unafraid to tackle head-on even the most challenging topics, perhaps especially the most challenging topics. Who wants to think about the end of the world? And yet, Jon insists, and I agree, that we have to. In End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate, Jon warns about the precarious situation humanity finds itself in and the potential for catastrophic events that could lead to the end of civilization as we know it. He explores a range of global issues such as climate change, nuclear war, pandemics, and other existential threats that could potentially lead to the collapse of human civilization. Overall, End of the World, Civilization and Its Fate is a cautionary tale that urges readers to confront the reality of the dangers we face and to take action to protect our civilization from potential catastrophe. I was asked to speak briefly about an additional threat to the world that has been coming up of late and has to do with AI, artificial intelligence. I'll speak about AI in terms of two psychoanalytic concepts, the drive for omnipotence and the drive towards self-destruction. That AI development derives from a drive for omnipotence is self-evident. Ray Kurzweil, a renowned futurist, author of How to Create a Mind and the Singularity is Near, and also known as the Oracle among computer scientists, claims that AI will surpass human intelligence and pass the Turing test by 2029. And by 2045, humans will merge with AI, a phenomenon he calls the singularity. He predicts that there will soon be software-based humans. He is neither crazy nor alone. Such luminaries as roboticist Hans Moravec, cognitive scientist Marvin Minsky, and neuroscientist David Eagleman and a host of others agree that human beings will soon merge with an exponentially expanding technology that will make much of the stuff of science fiction seem tame by comparison. David Levy, a roboticist and leading researcher in the field of AI, claims that by 2050, human beings will wed robots. The debate about such strange possibilities notwithstanding, the fact that they are taken seriously by first-rate thinkers and are guiding research and funding development carries an important message and subtext. The seeds of the post-human age have already been sown. A good example of this is Elon Musk's company Neuralink that received FDA approval last year for human testing of a brain chip implantation into humans. The aim here is to merge humans with machines to treat brain diseases, paralysis, blindness, and depression. However, the company's ultimate aim is human enhancement or transhumanism to achieve a symbiosis between humans and AI. Google has gone so far as to develop a project, Calico, to solve the problem of death. The goal is obvious here, even if rarely stated, to become gods of our own existence or to die trying. I'm reminded of a very short science fiction story, Answer, by Frederick Brown. It was written in 1954, which was coincidentally around the time when AI was created. In this book, after the main character turns on his computer, he asks it, "Is there a God?" And the computer responds, "Yes, now there is a God." More recently, Larry Page, computer scientist and Google co-founder, said that, quote, "The ultimate goal of the race to build AI is to create a digital God." He believes this is the next step in evolution. Now, interestingly, as we naturally reach for the stars, we also risk, as in the myth of Icarus, falling down and destroying ourselves and the planet. Freud's death drive comes to mind here, the drive towards self-destruction or an inorganic state. When we push our limits too far, we know we are playing with fire. Thus, our goals to transcend human limitations necessarily bring the unnatural into being. We do technological things whose ethical outcomes are uncertain and often have unexpected and unfortunate consequences. The pollution of the natural surround, the mass destruction of animal species, catastrophic climate change, biological and nuclear warfare, ethical monstrosities revolving around genetic science, the cyborg, and so forth, all perversions of a kind. Yet that AI has the ability to self-improve is considered by many to constitute the most serious threat AI represents to humanity. More than taking jobs away from large swaths of people, lacking transparency, expressing biases, creating fake truths, sometimes acting creepy, and gradually replacing human-to-human relationships, AI makes itself more intelligent and stronger every day, actually every minute. AI can teach itself research chemistry, law, business, code, foreign languages, and how to play games that it was never taught. Sorry. Why is this dangerous? Because nukes, the most menacing human-made technological danger we've had until the present time, cannot make stronger nukes. AI can make stronger AI. Will we be able to trust an AI decision if we cannot understand its decision-making process? This is referred to as the black box problem. Will we be able to guarantee that its values and interests will be aligned with our own? This is referred to as the alignment problem. Yuval Harari, the historian, philosopher, and author of *Sapiens*, recently claimed, "I don't know if humans can survive AI," explaining that for the first time we have invented something that takes power away from humans. He calls this the end of human history. Mo Gaudet, former chief business officer at Google X, says we are having an Oppenheimer moment. He even advises potential parents not to have children until we have certainty of where AI is taking us. Cognitive scientist Doug Hofstadter wrote that AI could never replace humans, particularly because they have no soul, no self, no I. Yet, in 2023, Brooks reports that Hofstadter has shifted his thinking, now saying that AI, quote, just renders humanity a very small phenomenon compared to something else that is far more intelligent and will become incomprehensible to us as we are to cockroaches. Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI and winner of the Turing Prize, said that part of him regrets his life's work, which was aimed at understanding how the human brain works. He left Google to warn of AI's dangers. Elon Musk has compared AI to summoning the demon. Consequently, he and other prominent figures in the tech industry have called for a cautious approach that would slow down the public deployment of AI while developing safety measures. One of the most obvious being that one would be alerted to the fact that one is dealing with AI-created material as opposed to human-created material. Just this week, 13 current and former OpenAI and Google DeepMind employees have signed an open letter entitled "A Right to Warn About Advanced Artificial Intelligence," voicing concerns about a lack of safety oversight and governance in the AI industry and asking for better protection for whistleblowers. As of now, there are no such safety measures. I think of cars, the safety measures we have for cars, speed limits, safety belts. Think of nukes, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We need these kinds of safety measures for AI. So I don't want to leave you overcome by fear and dread without seeing a way out. How we develop AI systems that are safe, beneficial, and aligned with human values is a crucial challenge that researchers and developers must address. Here are some key points to consider when training AI to prevent it from causing harm or reducing human importance. First, we need to ensure that AI systems are designed and trained to align with human values, ethics, and moral principles. Second, we need to maintain human oversight and control over AI systems, particularly in high-stakes domains such as healthcare, finance, and defense. Humans should have the ability to intervene, modify, or shut down AI systems if necessary. We need to develop AI systems that are transparent and explainable, allowing humans to understand how the AI arrives at its decisions, and this would help build trust, right, and enable humans to identify and correct any errors or biases. We need to build AI systems that are robust and secure against potential misuse, hacking attempts, or unintended consequences. And this, of course, as I mentioned, would include incorporating safety measures and rigorous testing. We need to foster a collaborative relationship between AI and humans, where AI complements and augments human capabilities rather than replacing them entirely. And this would ensure that humans remain in the loop and retain control over critical decisions. We need to establish clear ethical guidelines and legal frameworks to govern the development, deployment, and use of AI systems. We need to encourage interdisciplinary research and collaboration between AI researchers, ethicists, policymakers, and domain experts to address the complex challenges associated with AI development and deployment. We need to engage the public in discussion about AI and its potential impacts on society. We need to promote AI literacy and education to help people understand the benefits and the risks of AI and make informed decisions about its use. So by prioritizing these considerations in the development and training of AI systems, we can work towards creating AI that is safe, beneficial, and aligned with human values, reducing the risk of AI causing harm or diminishing the importance of humans in the world. So I want to just leave you with a line from Shakespeare, borrowed from Ecclesiastes in his play, Henry V, where he has Falstaff say, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall die." Thanks. Thank you, Jon, for a wonderful book.
Okay. All right. So, Jon, I'm bringing you back. Unmute yourself, please.
Well,
And
yeah,
you have any responses, and then I will bring people to talk. So,
well, that was another wonderful, insightful analysis of the AI issue by Danielle. I'm of two minds with this. One is I'll let my critical faculty just free associate. Is it just me, or does it seem like that there is almost a grandiose, omnipotent fantasy of what the future will be with AI? It almost sounds like some hysteria that's wandering around and going to have, we're going to be controlled by machines. And then the other hand is let's think of the critical, rational faculty that needs to take into account these dangers. I mean, I should give you my, my bias is that I didn't even start using a cell phone until my wife made me have one. And this was just 3 years ago when I retired during the pandemic, just so she can talk to me. And I never carry it with me. I absolutely do not. The mere thought that anybody could get a hold of me at the drop of a dime is no. But I know this is the world we live in, and I'm behind the times. But this notion of these transcendental illusions of being able to improve ourselves through technology, on one hand, yes. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we have life-enhancing processes that turn out to be something that was beneficial to all of mankind? Yes, that'd be great. I'd like to give me a pill that's safe, meaning safe, and I'll be the first to take it to lose my gut, and the first to take it to deal with cancer. But usually that's not that simple. So the thought that we're going to be taken over by the world, by super intelligences, is something I'm skeptical about. Just like I'm skeptical about the futuristic fantasies that people have, that like Elon Musk or the Virgin mogul guy who's going to fly into space and colonize space and have some kind of escape hatch where we can retreat to when we destroy our planet, rather than dealing with the existential issues right now to prevent that from happening. So having said that, though, people who specialize in these technologies, let's say they're not doing it for their own hype. They're not doing it for self-preservation of being sued or for monetary reasons, but they're doing it for humanitarian reasons that they're trying to warn us about it, then we have to think about all the elements that Danielle had mentioned about safeguarding. But the thought that, the thought that a machine can surpass human intelligence is one thing. To develop agency, a will of its own, and that it acquires a pernicious intent to destroy other people, such as the earth, or people. I mean, like, yeah, well, we've got a Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator that's coming for us. So Nick Bostrom talks about this in his book Superintelligences, where if machines can acquire their own agency, their own mind, they surpass human safeguards. We just don't know what the end will be. But if the end scenario is a bad one, then why would we allow this kind of technology to emerge to begin with? So this is where regulation, this is where the responsibility to to society and the masses come in. And if it's left up to private industry, where everything's about money, about power, about wealth, then I'm not sure that we are going to be able to trust how human greed will infect the process. So, however, at this stage, machines do not have cognition like we do. They don't have a sense of self-consciousness like we do. They're not at a state of being able to even remotely resemble human beings. So we're in the beginning stages. So if we're in the beginning stages, let's be very mindful about where this could lead. And that's basically where I'm at on that for now.
Thank you so much. I see that we have like 4 people in the queue, but Larry Wetzler, it's his birthday today. Happy birthday, Larry. If you're still here, would you like to say a few words? And then because he needs to leave for his birthday to celebrate it. Okay, so let me check if Larry is still here. I know he said he needs to leave. Lawrence, okay. All right. So, okay, so then we will go to we have just 2 minutes left before the break, and maybe we can just address one issue, like Padma, are you here?
Yes, thank you, Ina.
Okay.
Thank you, Loray. Thank you, Dr. Mills, for your words and thoughts. Very thought-provoking. I look forward to reading your book. During your presentation, Loray, and just thinking about your book, Dr. Mills, I was thinking about Winnicott, and it just kept very present in my mind, as well as Hegel's idea. You mentioned that the process of becoming, and that there's a belief in Hegel of the inevitability of Geist becoming self-actualized eventually through the process of thesis, antithesis, and sublation, the sublation. So I was thinking, is it possible, well, going back a little bit, and I'll be brief, is that in the process of becoming, there is an energy that is required, Geist, if we can call it, Hegel's term, and that that Geist sort of is always there. And what's above it is sort of these disturbances, if you will, of mind. And that, and I was tying it to Winnicott in the idea of the transitional area. Winnicott expanded it from transitional object to transitional space to transitional area, making a very wide berth for what this transitional area could encompass. Is it possible that what we're seeing now, and I have to say my bias is that I am a positivist, if you will, that I do believe in the inevitability of Geist persevering despite our unconscious unconscious drives and instincts. So I wonder if, is it possible for us to view some of the phenomena that we're seeing as occurring in this transitional area? That in a way, they are in the process of a full becoming, a healthy becoming, and that, you know, are there intrusions of reality in this transitional space that are bombarding, if you will, this transitional area with dreaming, the capacity to dream? I think, Loray, you had mentioned that in your opening remarks about hopefully we will have a chance to dream as well as be critical in our thinking. That is it possible that we're sort of waiting in the wings for something to rescue us or transform these beta elements, this phenomenon in this transitional area? And until then, we're somehow clinging to transitional objects, albeit not in the best way, these perversions, if you will. And we need some, in a way, break from reality so we can dream. Because we know from Winnicott's work that in order for the baby to have a sense of other, self and other, there has to be some space to breathe and dream.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking along these lines and wondered what your thoughts were.
That's a lot to
yeah.
buy. Let me say a couple things. Well, one is if we adopt Hegel's notion of spirit or mind as being omnipresent, and that in Hegel's system, you know, mind is pure logic. It's thought thinking itself, and it disperses its essence throughout the universe. It comes into being in material nature, which then evolves out of its basic organic states. It becomes the subjective spirit of animal life, and particularly humans. And then it becomes objective in the sense that it takes on a higher instantiation within society in a collective psyche or a collective unconscious psyche that then instantiates itself as, you know, law and order, as aesthetics, as philosophy, as religion and spirituality, that's seeking a culmination of understanding how it came into being. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that there are other antithetical forces that can pull spirit back to a more primitive nature.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that be Freud's, you know, the tension between Eros and the death drive that's constantly going, whether it be a Jungian notion of having to maintain, you know, the complementarity of opposites and hold the tension between them, hoping there's going to be a transcendent function that's going to lead to a unification. Well, it's possible. And what's going to be possible from the logical model is what are the things that can bring that into being? And I'll anticipate one of your questions. It's going to take a catalytic event. So like the pandemic was an event that brought people together out of necessity and force. So will it take another cataclysmic type of event to bring us together, start thinking about having a higher self-conscious or ethical self-consciousness that we will aspire to bring about and fulfill? I don't know. It could equally go both ways. It could go to a downward spiral. It could be that people realize that, oh my God, the planet's gonna implode. We got to do something now. It might be beyond. It might be already, beyond that tipping point. But it's 127 degrees in India right now. People are dropping like flies. I mean, this is the wake up time, and I'm hoping in at least the next few years we're going to see monumental shifts. So that's my optimism. I'll save my.
Thank you.
Supposed to have a break at 1:30 for 10 minutes. So we will break for 10 minutes. So okay, so it's 1:45 and we continue our conference celebration of Jon Mills' book, The End of the World. And so the next presenter or person that will reflect on Jon's book or some of the concept is Dr. Paul Elovitz. Paul is a founder and director of the Psychohistory Forum and founder and editor of the Clear Psyche. These organizations and this organization and this journal was, one of the sponsoring bodies of this conference. Paul has 3 degrees in history, trained as a psychoanalyst for 8 years before practicing as a psychotherapist for 3 decades. Dr. Elovitz taught world and Western civilization for a half-century at Rutgers, Temple, Farley, Dickinson universities, and Ramapo College. He's a lifelong environmentalist. Prior to the original Earth Day, he organized and ran a week-long environmental studies week at the Amber campus of Temple University. Professor Elovitz is a consistent recycler and advocate for mitigating human disruption for our small planet. As a scholar, he has over 400 publications. He would like to organize the 2025 spring seminar on environmentalism and special issue of Clear Psyche that really use in-depth psychoanalytic and psychobiographical concepts and methodologies. He argues that despite our enormous environmental problems and risk to our existence, that there are positive advances that should not be minimized. Pessimism just leads to sense of hopelessness. So now the podium is yours, Paul, and we're all ears.
Thank you, Jon Mills, for extraordinarily erudite work that covers so many different areas. It's extremely impressive. And I wonder if you're not using that cell phone has something to do with it. I often have thought that the deepest thought may have occurred in the late 19th century when among people who had the wherewithal, they could really focus. They didn't have the phone bothering them before the telephone became ubiquitous. They didn't, the British people who I've often studied, and I know Susan Cavalier Adler studies, and so many of us know so much about, are they would really spend time together. You went and visited a friend, not for an hour or two, not on Zoom, which is a tiring function, but rather you spend several weeks. And I have to confess that I only have this cell phone because my wife, who struggles with Parkinson's, some physical problems, and I had to be there for her, and I resisted other things creeping into it. I like that you really focus on thought and use your philosophical and psychoanalytic knowledge and experience as a therapist to think very deeply about these things. However, I'm sure you were waiting for the other shoe to drop and the but. As Shakespeare loved to say, but me no buts, in one of his plays. Because when I look at the glass, it is normally half full. And in listening to you last week at the International Psychohistorical Association, and in going through your book, I see an inclination to see that glass half empty. So I will speak a little bit about the ways in which it pays to listen to Padma and take a more positive approach. And we were sure the Soviet Union would not collapse without communism in Russia would not collapse without a catastrophe that might very well involve nuclear weapons. It collapsed. The white South Africans, and I don't know if this has anything to do with why Loray Daws left that country, but I'm running into numbers of very talented and typically white South Africans because they were never going to give up. They weren't going to give up. They were going to fight to the death for apartheid. And lo and behold, the Geist changed and they gave up. And then, of course, the people who took over from Nelson Mandela, oh, I wish he had lived to be 130, they used their position for their own ends, which why our South African psychohistorians, who I work closely with some of them, complain endlessly about no electricity, no water, the roads are horrible shape and clogged, etc. And so the people with wherewithal are inclining to leave the country unless they're some of the beneficiaries. So I'm so glad that there's a challenge to the AMC's control of the country. So we are capable of changing. And indeed, we have changed. In teaching for over a half century, civilization, I was amazed at how much improvement we have made, amazed at how much we have become more civilized. Oh, we're not civilized enough. We don't control our unconscious nearly enough, even if we're analysts. But we've made enormous progress. Inhibitions on killing are incredible. The military has a major problem. They discovered, because American military tries to be somewhat scientific, that on the Western Front, fighting the Nazis, that only 15 or to 20% of the soldiers actually fired their weapons. Now, that doesn't say they fired their weapons to actually kill the Nazis. There often was an unconscious desire to, well, I won't aim it, but I'll fire, because an unconscious deal, if I don't fire at them, maybe they won't fire at me. And I've read of people on firing squads who work so carefully to never hit the target, which is one of the reasons why they used a bunch of guys for firing squads, and perhaps pick a couple of sociopaths and psychopaths in there. We have made incredible progress. When I was born, there were between 2 and 3 billion people living at a much lower standard of living. And now there's 8 billion people at a higher standard of living. Now, part of that incredible population growth is that people have put lots of money into public health. Even Bill Gates, who was only caring about aggrandizing, I hope Musk gets some result of, gets influenced by the same thing, especially if you have legislators going after him. And then he decided, I'm gonna help people live in Africa. Of course, that creates new problems. What I'm saying is, yes, we humans are the problem. We're the solution. While I spent that wonderful week before Earth Day organizing my students and colleagues at the Ambler campus of Temple University to become aware of the dangers to our planet. I also, was aware that this is a very difficult process. Now that was before I trained and became a psychoanalyst, which made a world of difference. And I went through a period where I did recycle, but I was so frustrated I took up smoking, which I didn't for a very long time. I didn't do it for a very long time. It's so hard. People don't listen. I have a sense there could be a little of that in some of your writing, because I heard more optimism today than I heard last weekend when you spoke very briefly. And because it's such hard, discouraging work. And yet, we happen to have a president at the moment who has been passing policies which are not mentioned in this context in your book, trying to mitigate some of the results, even though this is hurting him electorally in terms of getting reelected. We're in a very difficult situation in the world. We have made such incredible progress. We've raised the standard of living. We have we accept the rights of children. Women are treated, well, even in advanced countries, not fully equally, but we're moving there. And in less militaristic ones than the United States, they can get elected as president in cases where the military tradition, they're slower to get elected as president. I'm looking to see how much time I have.
4 minutes.
Okay. Because the advance is enormous. It looked like the situation in Northern Ireland was hopeless. And Lord Allardyce, who was at our conference for the first half or so, is one of the people who helped make it go from hopeless to peace. Okay, there's dangers to that peace, but don't underestimate the ability of human beings. One of the reasons why I'm hoping, as Ina announced, that for next Earth Day, we can get together people who will seriously apply psychoanalytic concepts, not just say they're going to, and then they do the, oh, woe is me, which is I've seen too much of. But as you apply psychoanalytic concepts at places, not quite as much as I would have liked, but then I'm a psychoanalytic imperialist, I must say, and have both a special issue on improving the environment as well as the politics, but mostly the environment that's more manageable. And you really using our knowledge and knowledge of other fields that you do so well. Thank you so much for the work you've done. And I thank Ina, because I was a naysayer. I'd say, I'm tired. I want my summer off. And Ina said, you gotta, please help me. You gotta read this book. She didn't know about my perpetual optimism in this area. But I'll toast you with the glass half full, and let's hope that all of us work to apply our special knowledges to making it a better, more sustainable world.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Okay, so I will bring Jon here. Okay.
That was wonderful. Yeah, we definitely need to hear these positive, uplifting, possible future narratives. So, yeah, maybe I'm more optimistic than I think I am, and hearing the way you describe, you know, your life investment in ecological preservation. Well, I've been toying with this in some ways. I wrote a paper on revisiting the future, and there are some people who let me just give you a real quick scenario though. Every time that I've tried to publish a paper in a discipline outside of my own, you'll get reviewers that will just shoot it down immediately if it's not their preferred view of the world. So trying to get a paper placed in this journal called Futures, like absolutely no way is any doomsday scenario ever gonna listen those pages. So, but the point is that the futurists are very optimistic people. They are engaged in looking at the future in terms of its potential, alternative and preferred futures, and using foresight narratives are really, motivating, and it gets people connected in terms of a collective value system. And when that happens, it does mobilize the way people talk about their preferred futures. And it really introduces, I think, hope that things can be different. So anyway, I'm hoping that it does take people like yourself to get people like me interested and involved in concrete change, whether that be whether we're social change agents and we operate in our own way, whether like it's me through writing, you through activism, or even what can we do in terms of our own lives. Ina mentions you being a recycler. Well, Canada demands that we recycle. I mean, it's just mandated. It's part of our community. I have a country home on 50 acres in my own lake, and we're foresters. We have a managed woodlot and a plan and all of that stuff, and I take great pleasure in being on my property and conserving wildlife as well. But I realize that even if I do this stuff, it's only a drop in the bucket. And it has to be done on a mass collective scale. And I'm hoping like yourself that we as a collective start to act differently. And it is not all doom and gloom. So I'm hoping that your scenario is going to turn out to be the case. And I thank you so much for all your scholarship as well. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we will not take any questions now, so we can pull all the questions at the end for general discussion. So I will bring the next speaker, and I will bring the next speaker, who is Ian Hughes. Let me put the spotlight. Okay, hello, Ian. Let me say a few words about Ian first before Ian comes in. So Ian Hughes is a senior research fellow at MAREI, I think it's Marine, yes, Research Center, Environmental Research Institute, University College Cork, UCC, Ireland. He's leading the Deep Institutional Innovation for Sustainability and Human Flourishing, DIIS, initiative at UCC, which comprises a transdisciplinary community of over 30 academics and practitioners. His recent books include Disordered Minds, How Dangerous Personalities Are Destroying Democracy, and Metaphor, Sustainability, Transformation, Transdisciplinary Perspectives. Ian will address a number of general issues that John's book raises, like first, the fact that our current crisis is not simply the climate crisis, but includes a whole range of other crises, as John says, and then second, that it is a dire and dangerous situation, but perhaps there is a room for hope. It's very, very much resonating with what Paul and John were talking about right now. And third, that Ian will talk about his work and his contribution, and how that hope must be based on a radical reimagining of society. So Ian, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. And thanks also, John. Congratulations on the book. It's wonderful to be joining you here. I'm in Dublin. I'm based in Dublin in Ireland here. So it's wonderful to be joining you. Thanks to Anna and Paul for the invitation. As Anna says, there's a few things I'm going to start with that resonate very much with what you've written, John. So in particular, the starting point, that beyond climate isolationism is how I've heard it put, that climate change isn't the only crisis that we need to worry about. And you've articulated very well the range of crises that we're facing, from nuclear weapons, technological crises, AI, as we heard, but also social problems, the divisions within society, the erosion of democracy, the rise of autocracies and so forth. So absolutely where you're coming from in terms of the multiple crises we face, how dangerous a moment this is as well. And I think in response to the slide you put up, Anna, of the failed civilizations, and that we may be in a similar moment, I think, John, you would agree that the moment we're in at the moment is quite unprecedented historically, I think, because previously civilizations fell was a particular civilization, a community in a particular area. The moment we're facing now is potentially the end of humanity. So I think we're in a kind of historically unprecedented situation. And having said that, coming back to Paul's point there about hope, I think we should seriously, as you have done, John, we should take seriously this idea of end of civilization. But where I'm going to take this now is that almost should we embrace that idea of the end of this particular template for civilization? And I think something that was said earlier in terms of Alain Badiou and his characterization of every civilization that we've had since we began to come together collectively has been what Badiou calls this Neolithic structure, a very pyramidal, hierarchical structure that has elites at the top, a middle class who gain from the structure, but have to acquiesce to the power and wealth concentration of the elites, and then a large majority who are largely disenfranchised and impoverished. And Badu argues that that's been the template that we have lived within since the beginning of history, beginning of written history. And the people at the top may have changed, from pharaohs and god kings to today's presidents and party chairmen, but the basic structure has stayed the same. So the challenge, as Badu puts it, is to escape the Neolithic. And that's how I visualize, in a sense, what our challenge is now. So in terms of all of the way that you've characterized the dire danger that we're in, I put this idea of this escaping the Neolithic as being the almost historically unprecedented position that we're in. But again, Badu talks about, there have been multiple, almost since the beginning of history, while there have been those at the top of the hierarchy who have been continually trying to maintain it, there have been movements throughout history that have been trying to undermine this, to undo this. And Badu talks about early Christianity, for example, as being one of those attempts. The Enlightenment and modernity as being another attempt. And Badu, of course, is a communist, so he points to communism as being an attempt to do so, which was derailed very quickly because it inherently had violence and revolution as a core part of its methodology, which was bound to end in disaster. But all of these, in a way, have been attempts to move from what we've heard talked about in multiple ways already today, from dominance values of hierarchy and violence and sort of competitiveness and narcissism and so forth, to more cooperative, where empathy where what we were talking about, what people were talking about earlier in terms of natality and world spirit and all of those metaphors, for how those things can be given room to grow, which they can't, you could argue, in the current Neolithic hierarchical dominant system. So I guess to your question earlier then, John, how do we get rid of the psychopaths at the top, which is kind of the core question. If we're trying to undo this Neolithic structure, we have to do two things, I guess. One of them is to completely change the values that characterize that structure in terms of the violent structure. One of our contributors earlier was talking about the systems of racism and sexism, hypermasculinity, the war system, and so on. So replacing those values and also replacing the psychopaths who are at multiple positions within. And that, in a sense, is a large part of what the project is that myself and colleagues in UCC and our collaborators are working, trying to figure out how, taking that seriously, how could we go about doing that? And so we're taking it, as I say, we're taking the idea of end of civilization very seriously. That template of the Neolithic is the problem, and how do we escape from it? And what we need to do then, what we are saying in our project, is we basically have to reimagine every one of the social institutions that comprises our society, whether it's politics, whether it's economics, whether it's technology, religion, gender, education. All of these structures have a similar pyramidal hierarchical structure, and all of them, in a way, are ladders for the psychopaths and malignant narcissists and so on to climb to the top. As they are at the moment, there's enough of the values embedded within them that they are able to climb to the top of these systems. So reimagining the social institutions in society is fundamental, which is like sort of like taming the elephant, or this is such a huge undertaking. So a lot of what we've been trying to do is to try and imagine, how do you even begin to conceptualize such a thing? And I'm watching the time, so I think I still have about 5 minutes, Ina. Yeah. So just briefly to tell you what that framing is, to give you a sense of what we're trying to think about. So if you consider the four sides of a picture frame, we have characterized those four sides. So the top side then we're calling new narratives of transformation. What are the narratives of what it is, the transformation that we're going through? And the dominant narrative, certainly in the climate negotiations, is one of technological transformation. It's about replacing our energy system with low energy. It's about replacing our agricultural systems with more sustainable agriculture and so on. But we're looking for other ways of what is the narrative. There's one particular framing which is about similarly in this socio-technical transformation, but it's about the landscape of values within which those technological transformations are happening. And those value systems are really the value systems of industrial modernity. We talked about the competitiveness, the homo economicus, that we are materially driven and so forth. And you can go further than that again to almost a narrative of post-modernity. That's what's actually happening now, is that the colonialism, the racism, the hypermasculinity that's embedded in these systems is now being challenged and overturned, or trying to be overturned, by lots of social movements that are in different areas. Yeah. The second part of the framing is about ethical containment. It's almost like Winnicott's containment. Yeah. How are we going to have a containment of this transformation so it doesn't end up like the transfer, in Mao's China or in Hitler's Germany, whenever you get this kind of social disintegration, or this kind of, you called it catalytic events, John. Usually they're catalytic events that are also cataclysmic events. How do we have an ethical containment that doesn't allow that to happen? The other two sides of the framing are the dynamics of transformation. If we think about technological transformation, there's lots of ways about thinking about the dynamics of that, of tipping points or scaling up of technology and so on. If we're talking about a deep cultural and ethical and consciousness transformation, what kind of dynamics are we talking about there? How do we begin to talk about that? And then finally, the other side, the fourth side of the frame, is ways of seeing. And that ways of seeing is where we can bring in arts and humanities, other perspectives, and also, I think, crucially, psychoanalysis. The thinking and the metaphors that psychoanalysis has to bring into this conversation about a new consciousness, that transformation isn't simply a technological substitution, it's a new consciousness. Yeah. So I say, in terms of hope then, and going back to Paul's points, I would think in our reading around and our meetings around this, people point to the seeds of transformation, that there are already seeds of hope and examples in all of these areas, whether it's in politics, new types of politics, new types of beyond growth economics, whether it's about technology and trying to think outside the innovation systems themselves to what constraints can be put on. There are these seeds of hope and these seeds of transformation that are already happening. They're marginalized, but how do we, to the questions that we had earlier, how do we join these up? How do we make these coalesce to a movement that sees that they're not just isolated sort of movements and isolated causes that they're aiming at, but they're aiming at this fundamental transformation, and the narrative of that is part of what the project that we're trying to work on. So, as I say, so congratulations, John, and huge thanks to you for your work, and I hope something that I've said has some resonance with you.
Thanks so much. I will bring John in 1 second, and so John can respond.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was great. Yes, it sounds very exciting, the projects that you're working on with your team. Can I ask, do you have a formula for how we are going to get people on board with this new ethic of valuing otherness, whether it be our natural environments or alterity in our societies, where we could come together and at least have a conceptual framework, if not maybe an emotional one, around mutually appreciating a new valuation practice that we should adopt? As you've gotten to that, especially with the having to challenge the elites, having to challenge people who are in power and people who have capital and are inclined to want to do whatever they can to hold on to it.
So I guess the best that I can answer in that, John, at the moment is, again, a conceptualization, that if you think of the dominant systems as being these hierarchical systems that have they're the ones that have the primacy of power, if you like, but they also always live in simultaneously alongside this much more sort of meshwork, if you like, this much more distributed sort of network kind of society. And I think this certainly in Ireland, for me, this was during the pandemic, it was almost the politics took a back seat, and it was the community. It was everyone taking the decision for themselves to stay in, everyone taking the decision for themselves to get vaccinated, yeah, to look after their neighbours and so forth. That for me, when the streets of Dublin were empty, was a sort of aha moment. This caring society, this network society already exists all around us. Its power is usurped in normal circumstances by the pyramidal hierarchical systems. Yeah? So the question is, and that's the same, I think, in every one of these, if you were to look at religion, at the same organizations have people who are trying to maintain the dominant systems alongside people who are trying to dismantle them. Yeah. And I think that can be said of each of these social institutions. So I think part of it is a consciousness that the transformation isn't something that we need to start from scratch. It's about empowering something that's already there and disempowering something that's dominating us. So that's probably not a very good answer to your question, because in terms of the actual practicalities, we aren't that far. We're working through the systems and thinking and looking at these seeds of transformation, where people, and lots of people globally, are trying very hard to do exactly that. Build the power in the networks and drain the power from the hierarchies. But as you said, there's lots of psychopaths and there's lots of malignant narcissists who are going to fight to the death to stop that from ever happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much. It's really well put. Yeah, I think Canada has, as a social democracy, it does have a collective valuation in society that's certainly different than the United States. I'm not an expert on your country, but there's a value system about universal health care and subsidized education, and we have to pitch in the kitty a little more with our taxes. But for the most part, it feels like it's working, even though there's a lot of problems, of course. But the point is that just to contrast my my colleagues in the States who don't see that alternative in their own societies, that they won't introduce universal healthcare subsidies or education subsidies in the same way. It's how do we have a conversation with these folks so we can bring them to the table? Let's discuss these ideas in a way that might lead to being able to listen to others' points of view. And that's about, I think, the most mature thing we can do. And if we use we use recognition theory that I attempt to do in the book, where there's the value of mutually recognizing the other and the other's point of view and perspectives and values, you can at least have some kind of dialogue, and where hopefully it will lead to mutual recognition of each side, and that leads somewhere at least. But I thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ian, too. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll leave John here, and just before we go to the general discussion for the rest of the time, just reflecting on what your conversation with Ian, I would like to ask you about education. Like I think that's kind of my opinion, that starting with education, teaching children to ask right questions. So you are a philosopher. Yes, philosophers are people that asking the right questions, and because we're asking the right questions, then people have a discussion and everybody has an opinion, or that everybody can do their own research. But our education lately in the last few decades is more about what to think, not how to think. And then that's why people don't have opinions of their own that based on research. That's what I see, but it's mostly based on groupthink, on who you belong to or which group you belong to. Can you please address it? I don't think like I read it in your book, like anything about that, but I didn't get to every little part of it. So I was trying, but didn't have enough time. So can you please tell me more about it?
Well, I think I would situate that in the chapter on evil, um, because on one hand we have to acknowledge these destructive forces in ourselves, as well as that they are universal. So I have a section on prejudice, and I'm not defining prejudice maybe in traditional ways of extreme hatred toward another group for simply being of another group. I think that's acquired. I think prejudice is more elementary, that we have preferred valuations, that we like certain things and dislike, and that we're more inclined to gravitate toward those who have shared identifications and values. Now, by nature, that can lead to tribalism or in-group, out-group fighting. But whatever the case may be, may lead to extreme forms of racism and xenophobia and the need to destroy the other simply for being different. And that could lead to other more nefarious forms of the sadistic aspects of who we are as people and cultures, and where we need to dominate others and keep them domesticated, or if not controlled. But for the most part, in democratic societies, we have to get along with other people, and yet, the social divisions that are happening right now, incredible. We see a regression to a basic or a simple economy of splitting, where the critical faculty seems to be absent, that it's either one's good and one's bad, and that's what people act out on impulses on. And it's a dangerous time, because it could lead to all kinds of social tenuousness, and those things. And when we have tenuous situations that lead to a downward spiral in some elements, it could spread to others, and it could spread from country to country, just kind of like the pandemic. So how do we deal with that on a large scale, when we, on one level, human nature is such that it's and I don't have a trouble using this word, primitive. It's basic. It's based in archaic processes, or our primordial natures, and that would have to be evolutionarily informed. But we are also enlightened human beings, at least on the collective scale. Maybe individuals aren't so much, but this, getting back to the notion of education, it needs to really be introduced very early, whether that be in the home, whether that be in the community or community groups or school. But not everybody is coming into the world in the best circumstances. They're being born into poverty, into trauma, into attachment disorders, into real economic and social disparities, where the basics are not even met. And we all know from our profession how that can condition the psyche, and then the next generation that's going to inherit these kinds of deficits. And that will mobilize the more primitive elements of our psyches to the degree that people don't develop a sense of love for others, let alone, empathy, recognition, compassion. And that to me is troublesome. And I mean, we see, what looks like to me a pandemic of personality disorders that just are all over, infiltrating the youth. And it's troublesome to know then what's the next generation of global citizens going to be like when there's so much trauma and suffering and deficits.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a deep, and sorry to taking this time, but I think it's important to see like where the roots are rather than just propose like some policy changes, because then they become a points of reaction rather than people subscribing to them. So I think that education and also role of parents, I think also super important to bring back. Okay, so we have a few people that are in the queue for Q&A. So we have half an hour left of our conference celebration of your book. So we will bring Lisa. I might be mispronouncing the last name, Lampere. Can you please put your camera on so I can bring you in, and also your microphone on? And then, okay, so you're not Lisa, okay? Sorry, I got it.
But I'm speaking for Lisa. This is Michael.
Okay,
Watching it together.
okay, good.
All right. Loray started his comments by posing two questions. Why are we passive social bystanders, right, to everything that is happening, to the crises that are unfolding? And his answer primarily was unconscious self-destruction, if I understood that correctly. And we wrote a comment on the chat, and I'll just repeat it. Being passive social bystanders is an understandable response to the absence of credible social forces and organizations that are addressing the multiple crises we are facing. So here, someone previously mentioned the primacy of the unconscious. Here, we would mention the primacy of the political, and not to dismiss the unconscious, but not to decontextualize the unconscious either, but to see it in a historical, socio-historical context. Okay, that's all we had to say, and we'd be interested, John, in your comments, in your responses.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I agree with you that the unconscious is political, that we internalize our values from our society. And this is why I think Freud in many ways did not really differentiate the individual from the collective. I'm not sure exactly how much I can add to what you're saying, that what happens if you have a unconscious that's dominated by internal oppressive forces that you then project onto others and want to exteriorize, versus coming to see that we all have our own political agendas when it comes to our psyche. Now, those forces, when I use politics here, I don't necessarily mean as we understand them with human relations. It could be that they work on very simple processes, splitting, negation of others, and that, over time, one acquires a certain self-consciousness, because I don't think we are born ethical creatures. We become them. And so we, at least if we use our own, observations of what it's like to be a child, or how kids treat each other in the nursery or on the playground. But we become, I think, socialized into what would be more having a moral self-consciousness for other people that we then incorporate in our development. Now, not everybody's going to get there, so that's the problem. And even those of us who've done a great deal of psychological work to get there still struggle with basic inner contradictions in the psyche. But that doesn't mean that in principle we can't transcend to some degree these negative factors. So I'm not sure I'm touching on your points, but the notion of overcoming our unconscious proclivities to to act out, so to speak, becoming aware of them, modulating them, channeling them, shifting them through sublimatory activities, and through critical reflection is part of becoming a cultivated person, I think. But we're not all given the same opportunities. And we also don't all have the same innate dispositions for that. I think we're quite unique in that sense. And so those degrees of freedom are never going to guarantee that we're all going to come together and, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But if we can at least have some shared universal values that for the most part are at least some kind of distributive justice, that we could value that, such as acknowledging universal human rights and things like this, then these are starting points.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will bring Kurt Jacobson, or Jacobson, please correct me if I'm incorrect. Adding you on the spotlight.
I'm a Yank, so it's Jacobson, not Jacobson.
Okay.
Like my father. Yeah, okay. I just want to say welcome the submission of John to this panel of interrogators and Inquisition. Second, I really agreed with just about everything that Ian Hughes had to say. So that obviates a lot of much what I say. So just final remark is that to add to, in some sense, to Hughes, is thinking about Paul's optimism. And I think if you give credit, survey data on these matters, any credit at all, there's a great deal of reason to have optimism that 2/3 to 3/4 of populations in the West, Western people surveyed, US, UK, so on, want every single thing that you could define, this group could define as progressive. They want a national health care. They want diplomacy first. They want free education. They want all those. They want more butter than guns. They aren't getting it, right? So there's a tremendous gap between what elites are going to give and what the populations they allegedly represent desire from them. And the question is crossing that, changing that, altering that. And how do you cross that divide? Now, I tend to see things and fundamentally as class politics. And there's all kinds of class politics, and there's every possible variation of expression of that through class, through race, creed, etc. But class is at the base of much of what we do, and so I just want to keep that little factor in mind, and maybe get a response out of John, perhaps, about that role. But again, regarding optimism, I think there's tremendous reasons for optimism. Question is, how do you get there in terms of translating popular sentiment and popular concerns into actual policy, into real action?
Thank you, Kurt. Okay, John, your response?
It's nice to see you in person. Yes. Well, where do I begin? How do we get people who are advocating for wanting these changes to persuade those in authority or power or in the hierarchy of structure to address the needs of the masses? Well, I suppose that in some ways we do have the capacity to vote them out. Why are people not doing that? I would imagine, again, it has to do with self-interest. And most people are not likely to be worrying about some stranger in a foreign land over their immediate standard of living, and that there's a disconnect between those needs and values, even though we might, enlightened self-reason tells us that we should be thinking about the greater collective, because if we don't, there could be a regression or a tendency to devolve, and then that would, of course, impact on people's self-interest who are in the hierarchy. But these are difficult things. You're mentioning class. I mean, how do you change a capitalistic structure when that's like the only game in town? And for some reason, people don't see the need to want to pay higher taxes for spreading it out for the masses to equally have some benefit. One can make a real good argument for why we should do that. People are happier, they are less stressed out, that it could even be monetized. But they prefer to have, gas set at a certain, price. They prefer not to have commodity sticker shock and affordable housing and all these things that are not happening. At least they're not happening here. What do we do with class? Well, I mean, a lot of people who, myself included, you come from backgrounds that allow us to be successful. Of course, that doesn't mean that you're going to develop your intellect or your mind to get into university. You have to do that through merit, but at least be giving opportunities to exceed and excel are important. And hence, getting back to the notion of why some type of social distribution of services would be beneficial to all society. Now, whether or not you want to pay large amounts of taxes to help subsidize that is another thing that people have to vote on, politicians and their various types of policies. And it's not simple. And we're just talking about here. I mean, in North America, let alone, the rest of the globe. So, but I like the fact that we have to, if we did not have optimism, why would that motivate people to get out of bed in the morning? I mean, something has to give us a impetus for life and for living and for improvement. And if you don't have that, then you've got a damaged soul.
Thank you so much, John. So next will be Dr. Carla Adler. Susan, I will bring you in. Here you are. Susan, unmute yourself, please.
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Dr. Susan Adler. I'm the founder and executive director of this institute, the Object Relations Institute, for those of you who don't know me. I was just thinking in terms of, is there more optimism in viewing the death instinct as Melanie Klein talks about as opposed to Freud. I've written about Melanie Klein's bringing aggression to a symbolic level becomes part of the developmental, what I call the developmental mourning process. And in a lot of my writings, in a book on the anatomy of regret, though, I spoke particularly about transforming the aggression related to bringing regrets into consciousness as a way of moving into the depressive position from the paranoid schizoid position and to move towards love, as Michael Fishman was talking about, moving towards integration of self, moving away from the splitting that John was talking about. I mean, we'll always have malignant narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths like Trump, who every word out of their mouth is a lie and a projection. But Dr. Phil took a stab at it uselessly the other day, trying to talk to him within his frame of self, since there's no other in his consciousness, just saying maybe it's a waste of your time to only be preoccupied with revenge. He got nowhere. So I'm not talking about that, but, you know, but why do people follow that kind of sociopathic ideology, and which moves towards the autocratic and etc. You know, Rachel Maddow's going back to the 1930s to explore how it was going on all the time here, and before Hitler rose to power in Christian nationalism. And so, but what I was thinking that when people refer to the death instinct, they're referring to a Freudian idea of just entropy or nirvana. That's very, lacks the whole dynamic aspect of Kleinian death instinct, and lacks the idea of hostile aggression and a primal kind of envy that, if kept unconscious, can be perpetually destructive. The Freudian idea lacks the dynamism of the Kleinian view of the death instinct, which in my book on the Klein-Winnicott dialectic, I said that the paranoid, schizoid, and depressive positions, the psychic structures and the developmental issues would exist even if you don't believe in the idea of a death instinct. You just talk about hostile aggression being born with that, which Winnicott also believed in, even though he interpreted it differently. So I was an agnostic about the death instinct, but of course there's so much that points in that direction. But I never think of it really in terms of the Freudian death instinct. I think of it in terms of the Kleinian death instinct, which involves innate hostile aggression and how that can be transformed, how what's projected out or split can be reowned, and in reowning the hostile aggression in the self, there can be movements towards a depressive position where one can deal with loss and regret, and owning one's own self and being responsible for one's own behavior. Of course, I show clinical examples of those transformations. It's very different than talking just abstractly. And how many people are really in a clinical process, and there are those untreatable, like Trump, you know. So there are a lot of people that aren't, but there are a lot of people who are treatable. And I think my way of dealing with the despair is to think in terms of the clinical, because that's where I see hope, that's where I see transformation. Also, in my IPA presentation last week, I was talking about another specific example that wasn't clinical in the case of Cassidy Hutchinson, dealing with father disillusionment, leaving the Trump camp, becoming the truth teller on the January 6th committee. So seeing again their specific example, even though that one isn't clinical, but she was going through a developmental process, and you can see in her memoir.
We have only, Susan, we have only 30 minutes.
All right, well, my main point was about, can we have optimism when we see the death instinct more in the Kleinian sense of a dynamic process that can have an evolution as opposed to the Freudian just, death, entropy, and or else living in some hallucinatory nirvana. Okay, so that was my main point. Okay, John, I'd like yours. Okay.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate all your work too as well. Well, let's see. How do we get the average people that live in the world to be aware of their own internal destructive needs based on envy and hostility of the other, to then own their own shadow projections and make reparation for the damage they inflict on others, and then go through a mourning process of regret and integration, so they become more ethical, domesticated, or sophisticated ethical human beings. I do not know. I would think that it'd be a very tough imposition to place on social collectives to come to that area of development. However, it doesn't mean that's what social institutions introduce, like through religion, and but even in secular states or in secular mentalities, we benefit when we're cooperative and kind to others. Yet people don't seem to be seeking that out on a mass scale. So it's, to me, how do we deal with the split? How do we deal with the dialectic that's based on mutual opposition rather than mutual recognition? And I don't have a solution. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Maybe popularization of psychoanalytic thought rather than providing the opinions that are different, and insisting on different opinions. Maybe that could be something to think about. But thank you, Susan, and thank you, John. Okay, so next is Paul Elovitz. Asked me to put him in a queue. Okay, here you are.
Thank you. I'm hoping this will be a beginning rather than just a one-off. Step one, reviews of John's book, whatever your particular approach is. As editor-chief of Clio Psyche, I'm very pleased to be able to publish 1,000-word reviews. I also have friends and colleagues for 2 other psychoanalytic publications. So if 3 of you end up sending reviews in, then all the better. We'll get them published there, or certainly submit them to the others. That's step one. Step two is what I introduced at the beginning and had Ina introduce, is I would love for to have a work in progress meeting of the psychohistory forum that focuses on how we improve the world, especially in terms of the environment. But the other parts maybe get separated off. But for our work in progress meetings, we always need a paper. It's got to be at least 15 or 20 or 80 pages. And then we set up a forum where we nurture the ideas that the person brings. So I heard a variety of ideas in terms of how do we change society, including the idea specifically about the environment, which I'm more focused towards. So that's one of the things that we could do. And I thought in terms of Earth, of having it set up for close to Earth Day next year. But I need to get papers if we're going to do that. There's also a possibility of having a dialogue, which we publish dialogues, a dialogue with John, or when Michael Feshman, I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, if he's here now, when he talks about anger, because we've been in the anger society for so many decades, which is so destructive, and the negative society, which I've taught my students how to deal with the total negativity of the news, whether it worked or not, I can't guarantee. But I set up methods of dealing with it because the news thinks it has to be super negative. Otherwise, it's just propaganda for the administration or things of that nature. And that gives people this false image of the world in which you have all these incredibly negative people who are doing negative things, and that's not a reality. The reality is people are much more positive and generous, and because of negativity, I hear people saying, "Oh, they're all," in terms of the American election, and I just ran a nearly all-day panel on the threats to democracy in the U.S. and several other countries. That they think, "Oh, well, it's either one evil of two lessers or another evil of two lessers," unless they happen to be very much in love with Trump or Biden, with fewer in love with Biden. And so something that deals with that. But again, I need to have at least a dialogue, if not a paper. Cleo Psyche is a publication that loves to face things that are hard. Easy stuff we leave for others, but we face things that are hard. As our last issue, anti-Semitism, in the light of the horror that's been going on in the Middle East of late. And so these are my thoughts. Can we make it a beginning rather than just a one-off? And will people cooperate in this process? Or will Loray and Jon Mills and any other Canadians say, "Hey, this is what we have in Canada. Yeah, we have problems also. The United States should be working to do these things." And that sort of thing. This is my positivity. And again, I toast positivity and facing our problems rather than turning to negativity, running away from them, because we need a better world for my children and their children and your children. And even if you don't have children, for the future, we need a better world. And we have a world that's incredibly better than the one I was born into. And we need to make it much better. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's very generous offer. Thank you.
And then we don't really have time for everything, but Frossa was waiting, so I will bring her in, and then it will be the last questions and your last few words, John, in the end.
Yes, my question is very brief. Is what Dr. D'Agostino said at the beginning about the system of power. We still have to do to see what to do with it. And also, Dr. Elovitz said at the end of his talk before that we must use our skills in order to help the collectives, maybe the collectives that must be formed in order to do something with environmental issues. If, for example, to stop using fossil fuels is so important and so urgent, and we see that politics are governed by economics. We see that governments are a system a system with multinationals. And in Canada, Dr. Mills, there are a lot of companies that do mining in other countries of the world. You know this very well. So it's part of the problem, the big problem. And I think that we assign a lot of trust to governments, and we shouldn't. We start doing collectives to be to get ourselves involved in common decisions about environmental issues. And I think we must use therapists and analysts, must use their competences to help these collectives to talk with each other, people to talk with each other, which is quite a difficult thing to do. And I think we must help them. This is what I say.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jon. You have like 2 minutes left to bring it to close, and no, time flew. Time flew.
I appreciate everybody's generosity and your insights, and it's a lot to digest. I'm going to think more about what would be a sequel. Unfortunately, I'm on my next project that's not a particularly uplifting topic either. So, but I definitely think that if we don't have hope and optimism, that it's just a deleterious, ride down the roller coaster. So I appreciate everybody's perspective on that, and how do we get people on board to focus toward positive change. So I'm going to certainly reflect on it. And again, I'm grateful for the International Psychohistorical Association and the Object Relations Institute for hosting me. It was very thoughtful. And I also hope to take up Paul's kind invitation for follow-up, and I thank him as well for anyone interested in reviewing the books. So I'm grateful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to say that that the publisher, Rowman and Littlefield, they offer 30% discount on purchasing a book from their website. So everything will be, the discount code will be sent. It will be on our website where you were registering, RSVPing, and also when we're sending the recording to everybody who RSVP'd for this event, you will have the code right there, so you can do the purchase if you're interested. Also, if you would like to write a book review, the publisher will be happy to send you the book, the copy, the review copy, and then you just need to provide them with information, your name, and which journal you will be publishing with, and they will be sending you the review. So that information with the email of the publisher also will be sent in that email that will be sent probably in the next few days, within 1 week, to everybody who is registered. And thank you again, Jon, for such a tremendous work that you published, and for willingness to continue discussions and interrogations like Kurt said. I think that it enriches all of us in understanding that we are all one. Yes, we are all humanity that need to stand up for itself, or ourselves. So thank you so much, everybody. Jon, thank you. And everybody, thank you for being here. And, so we'll provide Jon's email if you want to contact him. Correct, Jon? And so everybody can be in touch. And Paul and I will be sending the calls for papers and calls for discussions, and hopefully we'll do the work in progress meeting where all of people here could be part of. All right, bye-bye.